Good day, everyone. In this lecture video, we will explore how culture shapes communication and education, and how cultural frameworks can enhance pedagogy in speech communication and speech language pathology. Our goal for this lecture is to understand not only the building blocks to understand the theories, but also to explore how these concepts apply in practice. Let us go back to our previous discussion. One way to understand culture through the lens of communication is by understanding verbal and nonverbal codes. Theorists like Clifford Geertz, Edward Hall, and Stuart Hall have similar perspectives when it comes to this. Culture profoundly shapes the way human beings communicate, both verbally and non-verbally, and understanding this relationship is essential in the study of speech communication. Geertz defines culture as a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms through which people communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge and attitudes towards life or towards the world. This definition shows that culture is not simply a collection of traditions or customs, but rather it is a symbolic framework that informs how meaning is created and shared. Every word that we say, every gestures that we make, every performances or ritual that we do in our community, or even the artifacts that we produce uh, carry a carries cultural significance, and these symbols act as vehicles for transmitting not only traditions but also values, beliefs, and also social norms. Edward Hall's theory of proxemics further deepens our understanding of how culture influences communication. Proxemics, according to Hall, refers to the study of personal space and the boundaries people create and maintain in their social interactions. Hall identified four proxemic zones: the intimate, the personal, the social, and the public. And these zones vary across cultures and affect how individuals interpret distance when it comes to communication. So, by understanding proxemics, it allows us as educators or even speech pathologists to avoid misinterpretations and also to adapt our practices to diverse cultural expectations and contexts. And lastly, Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model adds another layer by showing how cultural codes shape the interpretation of media and the messages that we communicate. According to Stuart Hall, communicators encode messages with certain meanings, but audiences decode them differently depending on their cultural background. This means that communication is never neutral, it is always filtered through various cultural lenses. In the field of speech communication, this principle shows us that messages, whether it is spoken or written or even visual, are subject to multiple interpretations. And that means that effective communication requires sensitivity to these cultural codes. So, by integrating Geertz's symbolic view of culture, Hall's theory of proxemics, and even Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding theory, it illustrates us that communication is inseparable from culture. Verbal communication, such as the choice of language, the use of tone, and even the meanings of the words we say, are deeply influenced by cultural norms. Nonverbal communication, such as gestures, proxemics, chronemics, our response to our environment, the artifacts that we use or that we wear, even the paralanguage that we do, are are also varied across different societies. So a gesture like nodding may signify agreement in one culture but simply indicate attractiveness in another culture. And that will also lead to certain misunderstandings, which often arise when communicators assume their own cultural codes as universal. For educators and speech pathologists, recognizing these differences is very crucial and essential when it comes to practice because it allows us to design various teaching strategies and even therapeutic interventions that respect to cultural diversity, that will also lead to avoid more misinterpretations and also create inclusive environments where effective communication can flourish. Ultimately, understanding culture through verbal and nonverbal communication also equips us to engage more effectively in various intercultural contexts, and so that we can ensure that speech and language practices are not only technically sound but are also culturally responsive. And building on that understanding of culture as a symbolic system, we now turn to the concept of cultural responsiveness. This time, we focus on how educators and even pathologists can actively respond to these cultural differences in their practice. Cultural responsiveness is more than just awareness. It is also an intentional framework that guides teaching and even uh, interventions or interactions to ensure that they are inclusive, respectful, and effective across diverse cultural contexts. It requires us to recognize that communication behaviors are not universal but are culturally situated, and therefore our pedagogy and even our practices in intervening with problems must be adapted accordingly. At its core, cultural responsiveness means taking into account the client's or the student's cultural perspectives, beliefs, and values in every aspect of education or when it comes to providing various services. For example, a speech pathologist working with a bilingual child must avoid evaluating the child solely through the lens of English proficiency. Instead, the speech pathologist should consider the child's home language, the communication practices of their family, and the cultural expectations around speech and language development. This prevents misdiagnosis and also ensures that therapy builds on the child's strengths rather than pathologizing cultural differences. Similarly, in a classroom setting, a culturally responsive educator acknowledges that students bring diverse communication styles. Some may value a direct form of communication, while others may prefer indirect or collective forms of expression. And by adapting teaching strategies to these differences, the educator creates a more inclusive environment where all students can thrive. Cultural responsiveness also requires self reflection. Educators and clinicians must examine their own cultural biases and assumptions, recognizing how these may influence their interpretations of communication behaviors. For instance, a teacher accustomed to Western norms of eye contact may misinterpret a student's avoidance of eye contact as disengagement, when in fact the student's culture signifies eye contact as respect. By reflecting critically on such assumptions, practitioners can avoid imposing their own cultural standards and instead validate the student's communicative intent. This reflective practice actually is related to Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model. Because just as messages are interpreted differently depending on the cultural background, the classroom um, and even clinical messages must also be understood through the lens of the learner or the client's culture. Moreover, the lens of the um, moreover, the cultural responsiveness is not static. It also evolves as practitioners encounter new cultural contexts. It also involves continuous learning, adaptation, and collaboration with communities. In speech language pathology, this might mean incorporating culturally relevant materials such as incorporating traditional songs or stories into therapy sessions. In education, it could involve designing assignments that allow students to draw on their cultural experiences, thereby validating their identities and also enriching their own learning process. These practices embody um, Edward Hall's proxemics theory by respecting cultural preferences for interactional distance and even considering their own communication styles so that they will be able to ensure that the learning or the therapeutic space feels safe and welcoming. Ultimately, the cultural responsiveness bridges the gap between theory and practice by embedding cultural responsiveness into pedagogy and or clinical work. The educators and speech language pathologists not only enhance communication effectiveness but also promote equity and inclusion. This framework ensures that diverse voices are heard, respected, and empowered, making communication not just a technical skill, but also but most importantly, a culturally grounded human practice. So, consider a classroom where students speak multiple languages at home but are taught primarily in the English language. A culturally responsive educator begins with theoretical foundations, understanding language acquisition theories, and social linguistic perspectives. They then apply concepts like code switching to explain why students mix languages in speech. Next, they build connections by linking local multilingual practices to global trends in bilingual education. Finally, um, they engage in reflective thinking, questioning whether standardized English assessments truly measure communicative competence in multilingual learners. This reflection leads to adapting assessment strategies, perhaps incorporating oral narratives in students' home languages, thus restarting the cycle with updated theoretical foundations. The outcome is a pedagogy that validates students' cultural identities while enhancing their communicative skills. The example that I mentioned is actually an application of the building blocks of culturally responsive practices in speech, language, and hearing, as you can see in this model. These building blocks, namely theoretical foundations, concepts, connections, and thinking, form a cyclical model that guides educators and speech language pathologists in developing practices that are both culturally sensitive and pedagogically effective. The cycle is crucial because cultural responsiveness is not a one-time achievement, but rather it is a continuous process of learning, applying, unlearning, reflecting, and even adapting. The cycle begins with the theoretical foundation, which provides the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and practices necessary to understand communication across cultures. Without a solid theoretical grounding, practitioners risk relying on stereotypes or even in superficial assumptions. From theory, we move to concepts, which involve developing our understanding of how learners create meaning and how communication functions in diverse contexts. Concepts are not actually abstract, but rather they are applied in real situations. By teaching students to analyze such concepts, educators empower them to see communication as dynamic and culturally embedded. Next is connections, which contextualize concepts from local to global. This stage emphasizes that communication practices are not isolated, but rather they are part of a broader cultural system. Connections ensure that cultural responsiveness is not parochial but expansive, preparing the learners or clients to navigate various intercultural interactions. And finally, the cycle leads to thinking, which involves a critical, dialectical, and reflective engagement. At this stage, the practitioners evaluate existing theories, question various assumptions, and even formulate new frameworks based on their connections, on the concepts, and even the theories that they learned. Reflective thinking allows practitioners to adapt new theories to real world diversity and also to ensure that responsiveness evolves with the changing cultural landscapes. Because the building blocks are cyclical, the process does not end with thinking. Reflection often leads back to refining theoretical foundations, which in turn informs new concepts, connections, and even further critical thinking. This cycle ensures that cultural responsiveness remains dynamic, iterative, and responsive to ongoing cultural shifts. So, when we talk about speech, it is actually tempting to think of it only as language or sound. Yet, the idea of speech communication is a profoundly interdisciplinary phenomenon, and it is shaped by by the natural sciences, by the social sciences, and even linguistics. For educators and speech language pathologists, understanding these bases is essential for designing culturally responsive pedagogy and clinical practice. Each basis of speech contributes um, unique perspectives, and here they holistically create a framework for communication. The first base of speech is the developmental stages in speech and language, or understanding the developmental stages in speech and language. Here, we look at how children acquire speech and language in various predictable stages, from the babbling of words to forming various words and sentences. However, these stages are also influenced by cultural and linguistic environments. For example, a child raised in a bilingual household may mix languages early on, which is normal but often misinterpreted as a delay when it comes to language learning. In speech communication instruction, recognizing developmental norms across languages prevents misdiagnosis and also supports inclusive teaching. The next is the physical and electronic production of sound. Here we here we look at how speech involves the physical production of sound through the vocal cords, articulators, and resonance systems. In modern contexts, electronic amplification and also digital tools also play a role in how speech is affected or how sound is produced. For pathology, this means considering both natural and assisted speech production. In the field of instruction, it highlights the importance of teaching students how various amplification devices, such as microphones or recording devices, and even digital platforms, affect the delivery of speech, especially in intercultural communication contexts where technology mediates interaction. Next is the physiological and the neurological basis of speech. Speech is actually rooted in the brain and our nervous system. Disorders such as aphasia or stuttering illustrate how neurological conditions disrupt the way we communicate. For educators, understanding these bases helps us in supporting students with various speech differences. For pathologists, it also guides um, therapeutical interventions that respects both medical and also cultural context. For instance, recognizing that family attitudes towards disability also shape the outcome of the therapy. Next is the next basis of speech is the use of phonetics, the use of the International Phonetic Alphabet or IPA, and the linguistic basis of speech. Phonetics involves or phonetics provides the scientific study of speech sound, and the IPA offers a universal system for analyzing them. In instruction, teaching IPA and learning IPA allows us to compare sounds across various languages. And this leads us to be more aware interculturally when it comes to teaching language or even in teaching sounds. In pathology, the use of IPA helps clinicians document speech patterns precisely, ensuring an accurate diagnosis across diverse linguistic backgrounds. The next basis of speech is the psychological basis of speech. Speech is influenced by psychological factors such as anxiety, confidence, and motivation. A student may speak fluently in informal settings but maybe struggle in public speaking due to performance anxiety. In pathology, a psychological basis of speech explain conditions like selective mutism, or when it comes to culturally responsive practices, it requires recognizing how cultural expectations such as valuing humility or maybe discouraging assertiveness shape psychological responses to speech. And then, finally, the socio-cultural basis of speech. Speech is embedded in social and cultural contexts. Norms about politeness, directness, or even silence vary widely. In some cultures, indirect speech is valued. In others, directness is very important. For educators, this means teaching students to navigate intercultural communication styles. For pathologists, it means designing therapeutical interventions that respects cultural norms. For example, incorporating storytelling traditions into language exercises for uh, for indigenous clients. For educators and speech pathologists, integrating these interdisciplinary insights into culturally responsive practice ensures that speech communication instruction and pathology are holistic, inclusive, and attuned to the diverse realities of learners and clients. Which leads us to the concept of educational communication. Educational communication is the systematic process of transmitting knowledge, skills, and values in ways that encourages learning. It is not simply about delivering information, but it is more focused on designing communication purpose that is purposeful, inclusive, and effective. These principles of educational communication highlights that learning and communication are interconnected processes shaped by both human and even non-human resources, and most importantly are deeply influenced by cultural context. For educators and even clinicians, these principles provide a framework for creating environments where diverse learners can thrive. The first one of the principles of educational communication is the creation of learning or looking at learning and communication as processes and systems. Communication in education is not a one way transfer of information, but a dynamic process involving feedback, adaptation, and interaction. It functions as a system where teachers, students, materials, and technologies interact. In culturally diverse classrooms, this means recognizing that communication styles differ. For speech pathology, it means therapy must be seen as a system involving the client, the family, the clinician, and the cultural environment. The next principle is looking at the planned and systematic approaches. Effective educational communication requires careful planning. The lessons and even the therapy sessions must be structured with clear objectives, strategies, and evaluation methods. In diverse contexts, planning also involves anticipating cultural differences. Systematic approaches ensure that communication to um, is not left to chance, but intentionally designed to meet the needs of the learners. The next principle is the utilization of human and non-human resources. Educational communication draws both on human resources and also non-human resources. In culturally diverse settings, resource selection must be sensitive to cultural relevance. For instance, using local folklore or tales as speech exercises that that so that it will validate the students' cultural heritage while teaching communication skills. In pathology, incorporating culturally familiar materials such as songs or stories or even community practices that can make therapy more effective and attuned to the context of the client. The next principle is the application of theories and research findings. Educational communication is or grounded in theory and grounded in theory not just in speech communication but also in education. Applying these theories ensures that practices are evidence based. In speech pathology, research on bilingual language acquisition informs therapy for multilingual clients and therefore preventing misdiagnosis and ensuring culturally appropriate interventions. The next concept is about the multiple functions of communication. Educational communication serves various functions, either to inform, to motivate, to persuade, or even to build relationships. In classrooms, communication motivates students to participate and creates or encourages a sense of belonging. In therapy, communication builds trust between the clinician and client, which is essential to create progress when it comes to therapy. So recognizing these functions helps practitioners design communication materials or even methods that go beyond information delivery to address emotional and also relational needs. And then the last principle is about the emphasis on the non-formal learning in developing contexts. In many parts of the world, especially in developing countries, non-formal learning such as holding community workshops, um, maybe creating various radio programs, or even uh, education among peers uh, show plays a crucial role and also a critical role when it comes to education. Educational communication must extend beyond the formal classroom to reach learners in diverse contexts. For example, a community radio program teaching pronunciation uh, of health terms or scientific terms illustrate how non-formal communication supports public health or even science. In speech pathology, parent training workshops in the rural areas empower families to support the language development of children outside of clinical settings. So at this point, we will look at the process of designing learning systems or knowledge management materials through a specific case study. The case study is about designing a speech communication program for multilingual learners in a rural Philippine school. So in a small rural school in the Cordillera region, teachers observed that many students struggled with oral presentations in the English language because these students were fluent in their home languages, Ilocano, Kankanae, Ibaloy, and Tagalog. But when asked to present in English, they often hesitated or maybe caused mispronounced words or avoided speaking altogether. So the school decided to design a culturally responsive learning system to address the challenge. They first looked at the rationale, and it was very clear that students need support in developing confidence and competence in English speech communication. But the program had to respect their multilingual backgrounds. So the goal was not to replace their home languages, but to build bridges between local linguistic practices and so that they would be able to speak in the English language. So, looking at the learner analysis, the teachers conducted interviews and even informal assessments. They discovered that students were highly articulate in their home languages, often engaging in storytelling and even in discussions within their communities. However, they lacked exposure to the English language outside the classroom. Importantly, cultural values such as humility and respect influence their reluctance to speak assertively in public. So this analysis highlighted that the challenge was not really the lack of ability of students to speak or even to learn in a specific language, but there's actually a mismatch between cultural norms in the community and the expectation within the classroom. And therefore, the resources and even the pedagogy are also different. When it comes to analyzing their resources, the school observed that they had limited technological resources. Maybe there are no books or there are no facilities that would enable reading, but they have access to community elders, they have access to local folk tales, and they also have access to basic audio equipment, particularly the use of smartphones. The teachers realized that these cultural and human resources could be powerful tools for the instruction or their intervention. So the school set instructional goals or learning outcomes such as the first is that students will demonstrate improved pronunciation of various English sounds. Next is that students will gain confidence in delivering short speeches in English. And the third is that students will also connect local storytelling traditions with formal speech communication practices. And when they try to evaluate this, instead of relying solely on standardized English tests, the evaluation plan included performance based assessments. So here, students would deliver short speeches, retell their local folk tales in English, and participate in peer discussions. Teachers would assess clarity, confidence, and cultural integration rather than only focusing on the accuracy when it comes to pronunciation or grammar. So, when they designed the learning task, they included the practice of speaking English phonemes using the charts from the International Phonetic Alphabet or IPA with comparison to the sounds that they use in the local context. The next task include the translation and the presentation of local folk tales in English, highlighting various cultural values. And lastly, the role playing of intercultural scenarios, such as how do you welcome visitors or how do you explain various community practices. So here, learning strategies emphasize collaboration and cultural validation. Peer feedback sessions allowed students to support one another. Elders were also invited to share their stories, which here students adapt these stories or narratives into English presentations. Teachers also used audio recordings so that students could hear and reflect on their progress. Importantly, these strategies respected various proxemic norms where students practice speeches in small groups before moving to larger audiences so that they would ease their discomfort when it comes to public speaking. So within within the year or 4 quarters of the school, the students um, showed improvement when it comes to their objectives. They were more confident. Their pronunciation are when it comes to speaking English words and phrases become clearer, and their speeches are also more meaningful when it comes to cultural content. So by grounding the program in a cultural responsive design process, uh, by understanding the rationale, the learner analysis, the resources, the goals, evaluation, tasks, and strategies, the school actually created a system that honored the students' cultural identities while equipping them um, with a new language that will help them speak to other cultures as well. So as we end this discussion, culture is not peripheral to communication. Rather, it is central when it comes to communication. By grounding our pedagogy and even practices in intervention, in cultural theories, responsiveness frameworks, interdisciplinary basis, and systematic design, we actually create environments where diverse voices are respected and empowered. With this, effective communication is not only about uh, the clarity of speech, but about honoring the cultural context in which speech lives. As future educators and clinicians, your challenge is to carry these insights forward, ensuring that communication is always inclusive, responsive, and transformative. With that, thank you for listening to this lecture. Humayo kayo at magpakarami.